Open source is catching on with hardware design, but it hasn't spread to all aspects of manufacturing. Why is that?
Well, I think you can see it from two angles. Firstly, from the startup's point of view, it's really hard to open your designs when a large manufacturer could come in with the capital, the experience, make what you're making and blow you out of the water. So it's really hard for startups to enter the ecosystem, but more importantly, I think big companies haven't adopted because they're missing really what their core value proposition to the consumer is. It's really the brand, the quality, all those other things that are adding to value for people to believe in their brand, not the physical product they're making per se. So I think that they're kind of missing the bucket there and an opportunity to learn more from opening their hardware.
Interesting. So it's the halo effect that's really valuable, not the core thing that they think is most valuable.
Yeah, exactly. It's, Apple is only the sum of its whole parts, right? So
what's the upside of open manufacturing? Why is it important?
Well, I think you get all the benefits of open source software in terms of, no redundant engineering time, the benefits to the greater community knowledge. But I think the big benefit towards an open hardware ecosystem is the sustainability aspect. So people aren't creating the same tools, the same plastics for the same parts. We're all using the same dowel pins, screws, fasteners in our things. So why are 10 different companies tooling up 10 different parts? So I think there's a huge environmental benefit that people are missing in the ecosystem as well.
Does that message resonate? I mean, is that catching on with manufacturers?
I think it is start to on the small scale, again with things like fasteners, but I think it's the larger things. When we get to molding a whole engine block or casting for that, where you're really going to start to see people hit the skids and not want to open their designs.
Do you feel that we're at or past the inflection point for hardware and software converging?
Well,
I'm going to hold you to it, whatever you say.
Exactly at the inflection point.
This is it right now.
Well, I'm an engineer, so I like to get specific. So I'd say we're more kind of an asymptote. I think they're converging towards each other, but I don't think there's going to be this one magic day where we wake up and all hardware and software is moving around in robots and controlling everything. So I do think there's a real, converging asymptote where we're seeing hardware and software closer and closer together. You rarely see products that are only in one ecosystem. Even the big software companies, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, are developing hardware to compete on that battlefield. They want you seeing their content through hardware. So in one sense, I think they're converging, but in another sense, I think it's forced engineer skill sets to diverge. So products have gotten so complicated that you don't just have one software engineer or one mechanical engineer. People are really getting into specialties and specifics. You really wouldn't want the same guy developing your app as you would your back end if you have a massive ecosystem.
Is that simply because everything becomes more complex as the two converge?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a couple things. Just the complexity, I think, is the main driver. But then also just as we get more people on the planet, more skills, people need more niches to differentiate themselves as an engineer.
I want to double back on something you were saying before where they're getting closer. The hardware and software convergence is getting closer. When did it start to happen? Is it a relatively new thing?
I would say really in the 80s, 90s, when you saw kind of the first consumer product boom that had software incorporated. So, software has really been around since the 50s. I would argue mechanical engineering, hardware design's been around since Industrial Revolution. But I don't really think it was till the 80s when you saw a lot of PCs. Apple came out with their colors, differentiation, more branding. That's when you really start to see hardware and software play better together.
So given your role at Highway1, you're on the front lines of the hardware shift. What do you see happening in this space over the next year or so?
Well, we're fortunate enough to see a lot of different things. My job is vetting candidates, seeing the new technologies. So I'm fortunate enough to see technologies that won't hit the shelves for 6 months to 6 years from now. So I think you're going to start to see a lot of trends. I think the wearable industry, quantified self, has kind of hit a stalling point on the fitness side, so I think they're going to start to move into other areas. You're going to start to see emotion trackers. It's something we've seen a lot of applications to our incubator for. So tell me when I'm stressed, help me figure out why I'm stressed. Yeah, so you're going to start to see a lot of that and then correlating that with the other trackers out there. Am I stressed because I exercised? Am I stressed because I didn't exercise? And all those kind of things.
That's interesting. So how do you see that playing out? I mean, do you think that the quantified self stuff is going to evolve to expand into that, or do you think it's going to kind of take a right turn into that type of thing?
I think you're going to see a few products that target that as their main vertical. I don't think you're going to see a big integrated wearable yet, because you look at companies like Nike, like they couldn't even really nail the fitness tracker with all the manpower, branding, and breadth that they have. So I think it's going to be really hard for someone to introduce something that does everything. So I think you'll see someone come out with an emotion tracker, build that really well, and whether it converges with the same hardware device, you'll obviously integrate all that software on the cloud to really learn more about your life.
So you think we're going to be wearing a bunch of different devices and then Maybe it merges in the software?
I think that it's going to start to happen. I mean, I myself am not big on the newest devices. You know, the only wearable I have is a watch, so it's been around for 1,000 years. But I do think you're going to start to see more diversity in wearables.
Interesting. What's your overall take on the Internet of Things?
I think it's
pro, con, I mean, what do you feel about it?
I think it's good that it's a trend that gets the public aware of what's going on, but I think the term is hard to capture really the whole ecosystem. Working in the startup incubator, we see people who try to force themselves into, I am an Internet of Things, or I'm not an Internet of Things, or I'm an integrated device, or things like that. So I feel like it somewhat limits people to put it in the buckets. And the other thing is I don't think it fully captures how intimate of a relationship people build with their products. You know, my iPhone, my fitness tracker, those things, you know, I get to know that object different than I would a personalized website, to say. So it's different than the internet in the sense that I know my iPhone not just because of the colored case I put on it, because every dent, scratch, and everything that I had in my personalized hardware.
Is there a term that you feel is a better representation?
Not yet.
Okay. I'll come back to you on that at some point. So last question for you. What people or projects are you tracking these days?
I'm really interested in the energy space. Before coming into consumer products, I worked in electric vehicles, power electronics, a lot of things trying to solve energy problems. So I really love the projects that are kind of at the convergence of those two spaces. So I don't think anybody's got it right yet, but I think you're starting to see a lot of things where even if you're not harvesting enough energy to make an impact, making people more aware of that. Saving energy, saving water. You know, Nest is a big example of that. You know, the unfortunate result of that is people with Nest use more energy. But I think products that can really harvest energy, one, will extend the power of products because batteries are always the limiting factor. But two, will start to get us closer to kind of a smaller footprint and holistic ecosystem. So, and by that I mean products, you know, they have watches that have done that for a while, you know, with vibration, but also we're starting to see a lot of people trying to put it in shoes, where it's every time I take a step, I'm saving that energy that I otherwise would just be wasting into ground and friction and heat.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.